Hello, welcome to Actual Spinster. My name is Anna Marie, and before I get into the video, there is a link in the description box to a GoFundMe for Ella and her family whilst they're in Gaza. If you could check that out, I would be grateful. So today I'm just going to talk about the books I read in February, and yes, I'm not very well. I haven't been very well, so we'll see how this goes. But I did want to keep up to date with my reading, so yeah. Okay, well, the first thing I finished was not really an actual book, it's more like a sort of zine slash collection of, it's like a book produced alongside an art kind of exhibition slash kind of exploration of that art, and it is an investigation into the Noseless Saint by Caitlin Hazel, and it's got lots of things in it, mostly pictures but some text, and some drawings, and just kind of documenting the process of making some of the things that were in this exhibition, which I didn't get to go to, but I love the artist Caitlin Hazel, and I think that this says it's the 3rd edition, and I believe when the 1st edition came out, I really wanted a copy of this because I'd love to just keep in contact with their work, and they have this quite kind of maybe zany and interesting focus on bodies, especially just in general, and then this is particularly interested in relics, saints, kind of mystical medieval folk tale-y stuff, archives, just leftover objects from the past, and also kind of creating kind of mythologies, saints' lives in a kind of funny, kooky way. Hence the Noseless Saint. Yeah, anyway, so I've just always really loved their work from a really long time ago. They were kind of a teenage artist. They did these illustrated diaries for Rookie Mag when it was still going, and I used to love those. And yeah, I followed them on Tumblr when they were on Tumblr, and just always found their kind of creative practices, their art, and just their approach to life quite inspiring. Here's some bread that they've been making with metalwork. And also stones, rocks that look like noses. The first book that I finished was Old Songs, Stories of Love and Death from Traditional Ballads by Amy Jeffs and Gwen Burns, which is a book I talked about wanting to read in my non-fiction TBR, but I had already kind of started it, so it's technically not on the TBR fully. And it's also a book somebody gave me for my birthday, so really happy to have read this. I did enjoy this. So it has these, let's find one, illustrations throughout. Some of them I definitely liked more than others. This is a great one. This is from Tamlin. I think this one is my favourite one. I honestly think that would be a great tattoo. So, but yeah, so I actually thought that this was more going to be illustrations and then mostly then the ballads themselves, and then also discussions of the historical nature of them, or the context, or the provenance of the ballads, or yeah, more focused on the context than on the tales themselves. But this actually contains 2 parts. One of them is somewhat of that information and kind of thinking about some of the themes or tropes in them, or symbols, and then also a retelling of these tales, which is the part that I just I wasn't really prepared for, and also wasn't that interested in. So I did enjoy reading this. I just also was a bit I could have left that. And I do think that some of the kind of historical and literary focus after the retellings on the ballads themselves was a little bit lacking. I think consistently there was this idea that you could look at any part of these ballads and say that there's a trans-historical connection to other literary works, not just literary, either oral works, and I don't know that I always buy that. I think that it can be more complicated than that. Yeah, I don't know, it was interesting, but it wasn't quite as meaty as I guess I wanted it to be. But I actually think one of the ways to have improved this book immeasurably would have been to much more deeply engage with the process or practice of collecting the ballads. Mostly the ballads in this are taken from a particular collector called something Child, but they're called Child Ballad Version, and then there's lots of different ones that he collected. I think in the late 1700s, I could be quite a little bit wrong, but the point is that he, or maybe in the late 1890s, I can't remember, but he had a really particular kind of focus on as to why he was collecting ones ballads, and how he and so that informed his like methodology and the ones that he collected and why. And I feel like not enough is focused on that in a way that I think makes it more lacking. And yeah, there was one comment about another collector called Anna Brown or Anna Gordon, I think, and about like some of the ways that she changed the different forms of like the different versions that she was collecting for her audience, in terms of especially like middle class or like more aristocratic audiences. And I think that's kind of important. And I think that you know, demonstrates the kind of like flexibility of this like canon or this like corpus of ballads that is sort of supposedly coming down to us and is some kind of like direct interaction with the past and with like let's say the early modern era, which is what lots of these sort of have some kind of connection to or potentially were being sung during. But at the same time, like that's clearly been like a tradition that has been like warped and distorted by people's particular kind of like ideological engagements with the process of ballad collection. And yeah, I just think there should have been more on that. I made a review that I posted on the various platforms I use to review books, and on Goodreads I think it was, somebody commented that there was a book called like 25 Poems of Britain or something, and they were saying that like my criticism of this, that or like in terms of, they agreed with my criticism of this, and in terms of like a book that does something similar and better, they recommended, I'll put a picture of it because I can't remember the exact title, but it like came out recently, and so I have been really intrigued to then pick that book up because it does sound really great. The other thing that I will say is like at the beginning of the introduction it says that you can like hear the poems if you go onto the link at the back of the book, and I couldn't find the link at the back of the book, and I emailed the publisher and they said that I need to go onto Amy Jeff's website, but when I tried to do that it wasn't available. So I'm not sure if I'll ever be able to listen to all of these ballads, which I think would also like add to my experience of them. And I feel like there is an audiobook, but obviously I was given this beautiful copy, so you know I wanted to read it. But yeah, I think that would also have like added to the practice and experience of this work. But you know, I did enjoy it, and I do think it's fairly well written, even if I kind of wanted it to be a bit more scholarly, I guess, or just a bit more critical of the what it was doing, I guess. Anyway, I don't know if that made any sense, but yeah, definitely let me know if you've read that or are interested in it, because I would love to know. Okay, the next book I read, I feel like I did like mostly more like light reading, and then I read this. And so this is An Unkindness of Ghosts by River Solomon. It's been on my TBR bookshelf for a really long time, and I did finally read it with this beautiful cover. Not sure if I actually have the bandwidth to talk about it because it's a very intense book. Certainly maybe not without crying, but it's about this spaceship, which has an exceptionally regimented system of like decks. It's kind of reconstituting is maybe the wrong word, but it's people are living in a racial system that certainly very closely resembles slavery and the sort of supremacist racial taxonomy of slavery, and like proximity to like blackness and labor and enslaved labor in particular. So it's very, very intense, and the level of like threat of physical and sexual violence is very high, as well as the like carrying out of those threats. And so it's very difficult to read. That's one of the reasons why I took so long to get to it, because I just knew that it would be really upsetting and difficult for me to read. And I was mostly correct. I tried to read this kind of as fast as possible, because being in like Asta, who's the main character, who's just this like wonderful, beautiful character, love her like so much. But being in her world was so stressful and just very intense and difficult. And for me, particularly the stuff around sexual violence was the most difficult, and the part that I wanted to get away from as fast as possible. And so yeah, it was really tough, but it's also this really, I sort of almost hesitate to say beautiful, because it does have a lot of violence in, but it is kind of beautiful, and like it has this commitment to life that's really lovely. And Asta herself, like I said, I'm gonna start crying, but like she has this amazing like sense of wonder and beauty and care, and she's so clever, and she's so like she's a healer, and she does lots of doctoring, and she has this relationship with the general surgeon, who lives in the decks above her and has many more privileges than her, but who is also lovely, and he's called Theo. I also loved Theo. And there's also a way that like belief in God is brought into this, or just like faith in general, which I really loved. And And yeah, I mean, there's like this moment where Asta like kisses like a bug or something, or maybe a caterpillar, I think, and that just feels so like that just speaks to like her care for and tenderness towards like living beings. And also she has this incredible like revolutionary commitment and rage towards like the system that she's in. And yeah, it's a really fantastic book. It is also just very difficult. I don't give it 5 stars in the end just because I couldn't say that I enjoyed it to the degree of a 5-star book because of how like upsetting and difficult I found it at times, and just honestly triggering. Like I tried very hard not to think about it when I wasn't reading it so that I wouldn't be more upset. But that was quite hard, and also because it's like a very vivid book that really stays with you. But yeah, just really fantastic, and I would definitely recommend it. The other kind of major thread of this, in part because of the way that it's about this like social conformity, social like violence that's happening, but also because of like how it's a queer novel that cares a lot about queerness, is the way that like gender is explored in this in a really, again, like loving and beautiful and kind of fascinating and just like sweet at points way, especially in terms of Asta's gender as well as Theo. And sorry, I'm wiping my tears away. I loved how Theo, I loved Theo, but I loved how, you know, it was very clear that he wasn't a man and he was trying to be gender non-conforming in the like strict society that he was in, and sometimes the descriptions of him were just really beautiful and sweet. And then like with Asta too, like she's, I mean, I would say that Asta was like butch, but she's definitely called a lot of things. She's also called a dyke, I think, on the page and stuff, and I think she kind of like sort of accepts that about herself, really. And yeah, so there's just this lovely like complexity and tenderness about gender nonconformity, gender strangeness, like, and I guess the other part of it is that Asta is very clearly neurodivergent. There's lots of moments where like that's very clear in the text, and then also just in terms of how Asta like understands her own experience, she feels separate from some of the social conformity, but also just in terms of like understanding how people are talking or why they say things, or the literalism behind what they're saying, or like the lack of literalism, I should say, like Asta taking things literally when they're actually meant metaphorically. And that was also really lovely and sort of affirming aspect to read about too, even if it also like sometimes adds to the like stress and fear of her punishment in terms of the like strict and awful like violence that is around her, and due to the stratification of the Matilda, which is the ship that she lives on. I'm not sure that I did a really very good job with this. I feel like it's just one of those books that you sort of do have to read, and anything I could say about it would be more eloquently expressed by reading it. But I would love to hear if you've read this. I definitely really want to read more River Solomon. I don't think I'm gonna go for Sorrowland next. I honestly don't think I can handle it. But I think I'm gonna try reading Model Home, which I think I saw on Jennifer's channel, which I've forgotten what it's called. But anyway, on her channel, that I think one of her favourite books of 2025 was Model Home. So I think that's what I'm gonna like check out next, and I'm looking forward to it because I'm sure it will be great. I also really love things that are about like houses and homes and stuff. I think that can be really interesting. So yeah, there's that. I also should say that I was like knitting this like little snail that I made out of like handspun yarn that I made, and so I decided, whilst I was like reading An Unkindness of Ghosts, so I decided that the best name for the snail would be Asta, because I think that she would appreciate that and also would like care about snails a lot. So Asta. The next book I read is kind of a bit random, and also certainly much less intense than An Unkindness of Ghosts, but this book was is called A Note of Explanation, A Little Tale of Secrets and Enchantment from Queen Mary's Doll's House, by Vita Sackville West, and it's in this like illustrated edition by Kate Bailey. Has these very kind of stylized illustrations, like 1920s stylized for sure. But I did look up the illustrator, and it was like contemporary. She's a contemporary illustrator. I saw this on Jen Campbell's channel, and I just thought it looked intriguing. I'm interested in Vita Sackville West, and I love, you know, it's funny that I made that comment about houses and homes, because the reason why I was like intrigued is because it's about a doll's house and I'm interested in houses. And it sounded like a kind of ghost story sort of thing, but it also just looked like a beautiful book and object. and it was also like very cheap, including postage, so I picked it up. I've definitely bought quite a few books this month, or like in February, partially because I was just having such a bad time, so I just was like doing things that would maybe make me feel better. So this was one of those things that I was like, okay, yeah, and I did enjoy it. It's a very kind of a slight story, but it's fun, and I do quite like the illustrations. I do feel a little bit, well, the reason why I looked up if the illustrator was doing illustrations now is because I do feel like, maybe in keeping with the like 1920s style, I do feel like there's some kind of slight like Orientalism to the images, and I don't really know that I like that. But I do think some of them are really beautiful, and just very like vibrant, but also again like very stylized in this like 1920s way that really like creates a sense of the atmosphere of the story. Yeah, it's a very simple story, like I said. The person in the doll's house, like the spirit, I should say, she's not really like a ghost in the sort of traditional sense, so it is slightly, it's not really a ghost story in that sense, even if it is kind of a ghost story. Oh, here we go. So here's like the doll maker like trying to figure out why there's such a mess in the wine cellar of the place. Yeah, like the class politics of this, bad. But that was sort of to be expected. Okay, and then the final book I read, honestly, I read so many hardback books, which is like no wonder why my body's painful. But I finished reading Do Admit, The Mitford Sisters and Me by Mimi Pond, which is, yeah, a sort of collective auto/biography of, I mean, it's not really that focused on Mimi Pond, but we do get some glimpses of her, but it's mostly a biography of the 6 Mitford sisters: Nancy, Pamela, Diana, Unity, Jessica, and Deborah. I guess the reason why I became interested in reading this is because I was thinking about like following on from making that video about like non-fiction books I want to read in this year, and thinking about the non-fiction books I enjoyed to read last year. I was thinking about graphic non-fiction, so I was like looking at what was like recent graphic non-fiction published, and this was one of them. So I thought I would check it out, because I am like interested in the Mitford sisters, not majorly. I mean, I do think that there is a way that they are like sort of fetishized as these like fascinating women, but it's also partially like sort of class envy that people are like very interested in them. I also think that the way that some of the politics of the sisters is talked about is pretty lacking, and I feel quite skeptical about. Also, their kind of very intense political leanings for some of them does also add to the like intrigue that is felt around them in general, and also me personally. Because yeah, so if you don't know, the Mitford sisters were basically a 20th century group of sisters, sort of from the beginning of the 1900s into like post-war. That's when they were the most sort of relevant, although some of them lived until the 1990s, maybe slightly into the 2000s, but I could be wrong, I can't really remember. But yeah, so, and Nancy Mitford's probably quite famous in the sense that she was a writer, and so she has books, like fictional books, and she was a writer during the time as well. So she has like fictional books that she's famous for, especially because they parodied her family, so it's another way to kind of enter into the Mitford, I think, what do they call it? The Mitford industry in this, which I think is quite real. And so that's like The Pursuit of Love. I think that's her most famous one. And there's also Love in a Cold Climate, things like that. And then the other two major, well, the other 3 out of the 6 of them that are like most major, at least in my opinion, is Diana, who became Diana Moseley and was a fascist, part of the British Union of Fascists, literally married to the leader of the British Union of Fascists, Oswald Mosley. And then Unity, who was absolutely obsessed with Hitler, met him so many times, and shot herself when Germany and England declared war. And, you know, she wrote to newsletters, to newspapers, particularly one in Germany, I think, declaring that she was a Jew hater and, you know, was, yeah, very obsessed and also a Nazi fascist. And then Jessica, or Decca, as she, I think, did prefer to be known, she became a communist. She also, like, tried to, I can't remember if she was actually successful, but she tried to help in the Spanish Civil War against the fascists, against Franco. And then she moved to America, was a communist, and was also part of, like, civil rights stuff there. Obviously, from that, you can see that I might have a favourite. But yeah, so obviously that's very interesting that in this family of fairly, like, well-known, you know, honourable peers' daughters or whatever, you have 2 fascists and then a communist. But yeah, to be honest, I found this kind of lacking. I I guess from a kind of practical perspective, I felt like sometimes it was really hard to keep track of who was who. Occasionally they would mention people and I would just be like, I don't know who that is. And then sometimes I found the writing quite hard to read, although I think that maybe got worse as the book went on, actually. I think at the beginning it's quite clear. And it does look pretty clear. Pretty queer here. It doesn't look queer. It looks clear. One of the sisters I think was queer. I think that's Pamela, but she was very boring / not really focused on / I kind of also think she was probably a fascist, so let's see, what else did I want to say? Like, it's all in blue and white and like, you know, different types of blues, and I did like that. I guess it is quite a long biography. It is quite a long book, and I do think after a while it is a little bit like but there are lots of different shades of blue. There were definitely parts of this where I really felt very skeptical about the political framing of the sisters, but then there were parts that I felt were like that did better than other kind of other things that I've read or interacted with around the Mitford sisters. Especially there was one part where the writer kind of called out that like people didn't mention this thing about the sisters' politics, especially like the fascist politics of them. I can't remember exactly what it was now, but yeah, I do feel like there was some kind of vaguely silly sort of like outrage that like Diana Mosley, like she never said she was sorry for like being a fascist, but like she was a fascist. Like, why would she apologize? I don't really understand why. Like, and if she had apologized, it would obviously be exceptionally empty. And like, I just don't understand why that's sort of like a sticking point when she wasn't just sort of like the wife of a fascist or a fascist sympathizer. She was a fascist. Like, I don't get that. And I mean, I find the term like fascist sympathizer kind of confusing anyway, because like, what does that mean? Are you a fascist? I think that kind of means you're a fascist. But anyway, so I guess like some of it was better than expected and some of it was less good. There was also a bit about the Communist Party in America where it just was like, and it was basically liberal, which I was just a bit like, this is a way to kind of make Decca a bit more like less radical than she maybe was, or to sort of numb some of the fear people have about communism. And I just was a bit like, okay, could leave that too. Like, I actually listened to a podcast about a piece of writing on the London Review of Books, which was a review of a new biography of Decca that came out, which I'll leave a link to the podcast because I didn't read the article, I just listened to the podcast, which was like an interview with the person who wrote the review. I hope that makes sense. And she was talking about like Decca's life and stuff, and in terms of particularly her, or like not particularly, but she mentioned some of the romantic relationships that she was in, including with her first husband Esmond, and then also with her like second husband Bob. And she talked about how Bob had cheated on Decca, and that is not mentioned at all in this book. And also what was not mentioned either was that like the way that Esmond is characterized in this is that like Decca and Esmond were like so deeply and completely in love, and that's obviously nice. And I came away from reading that first being like, oh, that's really sweet, like I'm so happy that she found that love. And then in the podcast episode, the person who wrote the review was saying that, I think her name was Rosemary, but I can't remember, but she was saying that like Esmond was known to be quite manipulative and a little bit, just like quite controlling and manipulative. So again, like I don't know how much to believe some of the characterizations of people in this following that experience. But I also think that's kind of the nature of like trying to write about 6 women as well as sort of yourself in a book that is 440 pages, which obviously is long, especially for a graphic work, but at the same time, like that's so many people and so many lives. The way that we kind of begin, I also felt was like a bit strange. I just also fundamentally felt like the stuff that included Mimi Pond's life just didn't really work. It was very like fragmented, and like I just didn't think it worked as like a structuring either. Like there was, and it wasn't really consistent enough to be a framing anyway. But like we begin with her talking about her childhood in the 1960s with her working class parents, and then basically the reason why she like became interested in the Mitford sisters was in part, or like she represents it at the beginning, but I feel like that doesn't feel particularly true throughout. But anyway, as being like the reason why she was like interested in them is because she was kind of like dazzled by their wealth and by their kind of richness of life. And obviously it's like complicated in terms of money, but they were like these upper class people and they had this gigantic home and blah blah blah. And I felt like it was kind of yeah, it was a mistake to sort of try to enter into their life and their world as being like, because you're like a fan of richness or something. Like, that was strange to me. The one bit that were like referred to Mimi Pond and her life that I really liked, which is kind of like, of course I did, is there's this like reflection about the prime of Miss Jean Brodie, because the film had come out when she was like a teenager, maybe. I'm not sure about the details of the timing specifically, but the one with Maggie Smith in, and she watched that. There's a character called Sandy in the novel and the book, and the author wrote about how she looked a lot like Sandy, and then also that she was sort of being bullied by this guy who would yell, "The prime of Miss Jean Brodie" at her, and also how she like didn't feel like she could talk about the fact that she looked a lot like Sandy because there's like sex in the film, but like it was so clear to her that she looked like Sandy, and obviously in the drawings she looks a lot like Sandy in the film. And anyway, so I just really like that sort of little bit about it. The other thing about the structuring is that it does this thing where we kind of are going through their lives chronologically, but occasionally we just like skip backwards a few years and then we talk about some other incident and then we go forward again and like keep going. And yeah, I just think it's kind of trying to do too much, and so it's not in enough detail, / it's just a bit brief in some parts. And also, you know, I mean, whilst it is about the Mitford sisters and there are instances and mentions of all of them, it also still feels like it's not really about any of them. But if it were to be, it's mostly about Diana, Unity, and then in the later stages, Jessica, and then also Nancy in and out, even though Nancy also sort of isn't super focused on. One thing that I thought was like crazy is that it doesn't have page numbers. Like, not a single page number. I do quite like that drawing. It did make me want to like read more Nancy Mitford, and also I really want to read Hans and Rebels, which is one of Decca's like biographies that she wrote, memoirs I guess. Here's sort of the comment about Mitford mania / the Mitford industry. The other thing that I noticed, like not just once or twice but like multiple times, like I think there were some comments that were literally repeated 3 times at least, like including kind of constantly mentioning that like Decca was Winston Churchill's like cousin. There was also another part that was mentioned, oh yeah, like a joke mentioned like many times, which was like Pamela hosting a chicken talk show chat. Like that joke was made multiple times, so I just also was a bit like, that's not very well sort of edited, and like I don't know why you're repeating this stuff over and over. Yeah, so I don't know, I wanted to really enjoy this but I didn't in the end, although I did get something out of it and it wasn't like terrible or anything. And I do feel like I learned more about like Decca's role in terms of like civil rights stuff in America. Something I learned that is actually crazy is that in the 1990s, I think it was, Diana Mosley was like hosted on Desert Island Discs on the BBC, which is also where she kind of talked about like not being sorry about stuff and also not really believing that 6 million Jews died in the Holocaust and stuff, and just like obviously loads of fascist bullshit. And then they just like let her be on Desert Island Disc. Like, why did they do that? Like, why did they do that? Like, that's just crazy, no? Like, that's just bizarre. And then also I think a fact in here was that like, let me try and find it, that they had to like reschedule its broadcast like 3 times because they kept scheduling it for Jewish holidays, which again is so fucking cursed. Anyway, I can't find the page, but it was crazy. Okay, I've talked like a lot, even though I thought I wasn't going to talk a lot, but there we go. Definitely let me know if you've read any of these books. I really hope that you had a better February than I did. And yeah, I will talk to you when I next talk to you. Bye.